I hit record, but we can edit.
Okay. Did you say ask about Risa?
Oh, yeah, Risa's here.
Yeah. Did you give her a call?
She's probably, we'll just give her a couple minutes.
Okay. Well, can I give you time? A couple minutes? Hey, we were just talking about you.
Me. Everybody stop talking. Hey, Jackie.
You're on camera.
Sit right in the middle. Yes, you do.
You on like right in front.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm tested for it.
You look beautiful.
That sounds like you.
It is.
Miss May had a new sub, and the sub was like, am I doing this right?
Alright, so,
Are you typing right?
I can type.
Okay.
Alright, so I guess we should all start by just saying where we are. So, Cook, where are you?
The recursive and explicit today. And the learning check.
Did you already go over arithmetic and geometric sequences?
Yeah, I did that day one.
Okay,
And then we introduced, but we didn't get a chance to
okay.
do anything.
So, alright, so I'm not the only one, I thought my kids just moved slower. I was trying to squeeze all that into one day.
Yeah, we introduced it and then but my kids were slowly remembering arithmetic.
They seemed confident with it at least. Alright, Risa, where are you?
Yeah, same. I just introduced the two sequences, and then the next day I'm gonna do the two equations.
Okay. Zerfus?
I introduced arithmetic yesterday, or we covered it. Today we're going to go over explicit and then learning check.
Okay.
We went over arithmetic and geometric, and we practiced the explicit formula, and we're gonna just practice that today again, just in small groups.
And you'll end with like a learning check on that topic? Okay.
Sorry, yeah, I meant we're doing explicit recursive for geometric sequences today.
Okay. And,
Here.
Hi. Alright, we're all on the same page then.
Cool. And you all have access to the learning check, right?
Yes.
That is, it's 2 pages, half sheet each. The second page is just flipped to the first 2. That way when you print them out, you can cut them and then they'll alternate automatically.
They're just two different versions, right?
Yeah, it's 2 different versions,
Okay.
about 3 or 4. And I try to make the answers, I try to make the questions comparable to each other.
Yeah.
There is one where you have to, the geometric ratio is a negative number, so it'll alternate between negatives. So just something to make sure that we hit. Where are we with the other graded assignment and the other learning check?
I'm going to be creating it.
I'm gonna put it up this weekend. You'll have it by Monday.
Yeah.
I actually do have a review that I don't think everybody else has that I can post.
That's why we picked you for that, because
Yeah, I do have a really
Riley
long,
has something.
I have a really
to
thorough
review.
review, yeah.
Okay. Is that for the review for Unit 7 exam, or is that the review
For the Unit 3, yeah, the whole Unit 3.
Okay. What do we want to, before we get to this Unit 2 exam, do we have a plan, or do we want to do anything particular or uniform for the review day on day, on day 6, day 5? We're reviewing slope, evaluate graphs, domain and range, remember comparing evaluations. Do we want to do anything uniform for that, or are we just going to do our own thing?
I thought Risa was.
I was making a graded classwork.
Oh, for that day? Day
Yeah.
5? Sorry, I thought you meant day 3.
Day 3, I think, is Cook.
Me.
Okay, so who's
3
doing,
and 4.
so who's got the learning check for day 4?
No, we're doing classwork.
Oh, so no
Right.
learning check on day 4?
You mean?
Day 4 is the graded classwork that I think is Cook's doing.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
There's nothing on day 3.
And day 5 is the graded classwork.
Mhm.
Yes.
Gotcha, I guess my schedule was off then, my mistake. Okay, then I'm with you guys. We're all on the same page. Alright.
So should we talk about our test results?
Yeah.
Okay,
So Ms. Seymour sent that email.
with the overall,
Yes, and thank you for forwarding that.
You're welcome.
yes, thank you.
Uh,
So I think it's important, I think a lot of times we struggle, right? Because, and I've had this conversation as I work with algebra teams, that usually our end result, which is our final exam, right? We do all this work all year long, they take this culminative exam, and they're not successful, right? And so we feel like all the work that we've done has not been beneficial, has not been fruitful, right? So we've had those conversations. And I've had those conversations with central office people, right? And I think it's important, what we don't do enough of is celebrate the small successes. So that is why I pulled last year's data with this year's data, because I need you to look at where you are making strides, right? And I attribute it to the work. I know the kids are different, right? And we talk about every year the kids are different. But we know pretty consistently where our kids' skills are in Algebra 1. They're not that varied year from year, right? So when we look at the data, there are things to be proud of in regards to performance for this year. Number one, this year you tested more kids electronically and your scores were still better, right? And they're shifting in the right direction. Areas that were areas of weakness last year, I think everything shifted up in terms of success for the kids, and some of them pretty significantly in terms of the standards that were addressed, right? So this is the type of work that we're doing, is looking at, right, where our kids are progressing, where we're doing well, what we're not doing well with, right, so that we can strengthen and look at instruction. So that's why I shared that information, because I thought it was important that you see that, because sometimes we feel like when we see a number and we see an average that's 45%, we feel like we're not doing the job right. But when we start to compare and see our growth, right, that's attributed to you all, right? I think more so than the kids. The kids, they get there, but it's attributed to you. So I just wanted to kind of reaffirm the importance of the work that you're doing. So that's the only thing I have to say about that, and I'll let you kind of go in. I'm hoping that you've taken the time to do some of the analysis so that your conversation is fruitful today.
Do you want to go over the questions? Well, or do you want to hear what questions?
I noticed the three that my students did the worst
Yeah.
on, were a number, and Jackie pointed out yesterday, and I totally forgot about how the last time you printed this, the questions weren't necessarily in order, but she pointed this out to me yesterday, so I'm happy she did that, because that would have confused me. But, yeah, so number 3, which was question 2 in the packet, number 18, which was question 1, and number 19, which was question 5. Those were the 3 that my kids did the worst on. Number 3 and 18, 0% got those right.
Just to make sure I'm on the same page, 18 is the one where it's like what values of
Yes.
X, okay.
Yeah.
So 18 and 3 are both multiple select.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
on average, because I did the whole, like all classes combined, 18 and 3 were the top 2 missed.
Yeah,
Okay.
So
that's what my kids also missed.
Oh, alright.
And I think they also have a hard time with anything context, like understanding the context type question.
Right.
And that was number 3, I think.
I mean, part 2 of it was the inequalities part 2, where they had to, was it shirts and shoes or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that was abysmal for like grading those. Like they had the first inequality, but they couldn't write the second one, which was just like the number of shorts plus the number of shoes was greater than 5.
Yeah, my kids had trouble graphing it too.
Okay, so I'm gonna add that to our notes. Application, translating applications to equations. Actually, I'm just gonna make a blanket statement of interpreting applications, interpreting context from a situation. I know-
Or graph.
Yeah, context from situation. And I know that's not the standard or the proper objective for me, but we can sort that out later. Interpreting context from situation or graph. You said number 20? No, you said 18. 18 was my number 1 as well.
Is that the one that involves substituting into the absolute value function?
Yeah.
yeah.
Right, and that's the one that we knew we were gonna have issues with at the beginning of the unit.
Yeah.
We wanted them to be able to just substitute answers in, but.
We were trying to teach them as a test strategy, not necessarily as that,
Skill.
yeah.
I did spend half a day like showing them how to solve for absolute value,
Mhm.
but not with the -4 outside the absolute value. Just so they can get an idea, and then for the more advanced students, I said, hey, you have to get rid of that additional constant first before you can split your equation. But overall, that was a TSGI lesson, so most of the students learned to just substitute and check. Alright, what else was there? You said 18? No, you said
19.
19.
Is it, wait, was 18 inequalities and absolute value?
18 was just absolute value.
Just absolute value.
My kids didn't do too bad on
I even showed him how to do, because, Dr. P showed us how to put it in Desmos using, and like find the intersections, and I even showed my kids multiple, and the other way how
Oh,
to do
just
it.
putting the whole thing in Desmos and
and
then,
then we're intersect 0.
Or you put in the left-hand side, and then you put in the right-hand side, like the equals 3 y equals 3, and then find the intersection. She did a problem like that during one of those
Yeah.
whatever.
Math language.
Yeah. So I showed them that way, and it's still.
wait,
So you put in the absolute value in one of the boxes.
right,
And then you, on the second box, you put in like y equals 3.
gotcha.
Right.
And then you
noticed
talk
that
about the intersection.
in my bridge class that like when they hear solve, they think it has to be very like convoluted, algebraic, like they don't think I can use that.
Right.
Mhm.
I showed them putting it in the y equals screen and looking at the table, but I showed that to them briefly. So,
No, so it has to be.
Yeah, I was trying to
get
give them
rid of
another,
sorry.
like,
And
you
put-
can either
we're gonna make that
substitute,
equal y.
which we did
But-
multiple times, I said,
It has
or,
to be there.
Are those the
Mhm.
solutions?
I showed them the other way.
These are the solutions?
Where they intersect.
0.
What's that?
Where it intersects.
You say,
No.
he put the
Oh,
whole,
you
put the
just
whole
put it
thing into
in.
Desmos, and
And then looked for,
we're on,
Crosses the
yeah,
x-axis.
the roots.
oh, no.
can you look for the roots if you put equals 2 then, or equals?
Wait, you can just
he
click
did
it.
put equals first.
Yeah, just you put equals 3. So it's 5 and whatever this is, 2, -2.
If you click on it, yeah, it should.
Yeah. Well, now I feel silly.
That works, when you have the whole equation.
I don't know if we're working testing.desmos. It probably does, doesn't it?
Isn't it the same exact website? I feel like there's nothing different. I don't know.
They can't, there's some things that they can't add.
Oh, okay. I thought it was exactly the same.
Like, they can't do folders and images, they can't do notes. There's a few things that are different from the testing site. I was just pointing out. Anyway, sorry.
Okay, so let's go back. So the purpose of the data tools is to look at the standards, not necessarily the particular question, but the standards. So in between the data tool that was prepared to prep, right, and the tool that's in the Schoology page that has the standards, Teresa pulled that 18 and 3 were the top 2, right? So we just talk about 18 and 3, right? And look at what the standards are. The first one was 18 is graphing, this has to do with piecewise functions, including step and absolute value functions, right? Was that standard that was addressed. And then 3 was the interpretation of slope and the intercepted linear model in the context of data. So there's a lot going on there and we need to unpack that, right? But we know for a fact that understanding the concept of slope in the context of a real world problem is a major thing. Like that never ever goes away, right? So how are we coming back and addressing that and making sure that we continue to nail that skill with them? Because that is they're going to see that all across the way. Are we using the words rate of change? Are we requiring that they're writing in the context of the problem, this is what it means? Like, that's what we want to look at. That was the question that every kid struggled with, right? So that we need to look at those standards and address, do we know if those standards are being addressed? Again, you did that really well last time, right? You had conversations about, okay, we know this standard's going to get addressed here in this next unit, so this is what we need to focus on. So moving into unit 3, right, this next unit, are we recycling back at this point to this idea of rate of change, the linear model, working off of a table, a graph, and an equation? If we're not, how are we recycling that instruction into what we're doing, right? Because that's the standard. So that's what we want to look at, is how do we continue to attack that? We have already identified, right, that our multiple select, right, is an issue for our kids. So I asked if we did the paper, right, if we had the kids do their tests on scrap paper, nobody answered me, right?
Wait,
We
yeah,
did.
yeah,
I did.
we do that.
Natalie did. Okay, so Natalie responded to me, right, if that was gonna be our practice, because then the next question that we should come to, the next answer we should come to the table with is that if the data shows 18 was bad, when I went and I looked at my kids' work for that question, right, what error patterns did I notice? Right, because remember, it's all or nothing. So if they have to pick 3 answers and they don't get all 3, then they're not gonna get any points, right? But now when I look at the work and look at the answers the kids showed me, what was that revealing in terms of their knowledge?
I did notice that not as many kids used the scrap paper with this test as they did with the last
I
quiz,
agree.
because we did a heavy focus on using Desmos for a
Mhm.
lot of it, and I think that they weren't doing like algebraic work for most of it that they could have used the Desmos for. So it is kind of difficult to figure out where they made mistakes for some of them.
For me, it was like whenever they see no solution or where there are no values, that's the answer they gravitate to. They see it as like, oh, this must be a trick question. And I told them in the beginning, I was like, it's rarely ever no solution. You have to do the work to find out there's no solution. And whenever they see it, like you can see it from my results, like that's what they're picking
Uh-huh.
every time. It's great. But so are we all doing the same 2 or 3 questions? Because for me, like number 3 wasn't as bad for me. So I don't want to make sure, I don't want us like to all focus on that one for our classes if you guys are good with slope. For me, it was like 18, 16, and 20, like the piecewise functions and the points that satisfy the inequalities.
My kids did well on 18.
Okay. Well, Risa, what can you teach us?
I taught them how to solve it, and they all did it.
Okay. Nice.
I see
That's
how
awesome.
that's
Well, 18, 19,
That's- I
and
did not
20
teach
are
them
all
that
the same
song.
standard.
What's that?
18, 19, 20 are all the same standard. So if
My
it's
kids didn't
18
do
and
well in
20,
16 either.
and 16 and 17, basically 16 through 20 were the top 6 worst.
16, yeah, 18,
Right,
20,
and so the
16.
standards were what?
And so we have 2 standards here, HSA REI D12 and HSF IFC 7B. So we have 2 standards, piecewise functions, an absolute value, and then graphing solutions to a set of systems. So I felt like those were the top 2 standards as a group that needed to be addressed.
Okay.
So should we start incorporate, like how are we gonna incorporate
Well,
this stuff back
um,
into the?
This one, the standard, the C7B, will show up again in Unit 4, and it's an assessment item number 16 for the next.
That's what I told
So that's
The
standard.
piecewise
Oh,
functions.
Piecewise, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Just
And that makes sense
they
because
see all the,
the piecewise functions include a quadratic.
see that.
Yes,
So can I ask a question, is that in the next unit?
it's in Unit 4.
Unit four.
We're in
Unit four,
2. Unit 3 is
okay.
the same case for us.
Okay.
So it'll be,
Well, it sounded like you're doing arithmetic and geometric, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what we're.
So then
Exponential
can I
functions.
ask, can I ask a question about that then?
Mhm.
About, so how do you, and this is like a legitimate question, how do you best teach your kids seriously the piecewise function piece? Because it's not easy to do in the graphing calculator, and it's easier to do in Desmos, but it's still not super easy to do in Desmos.
What part of the piecewise?
So, like in terms of the graphing and the domain, because what's the standard there? Again,
graph piecewise defined functions, including step and absolute value functions.
Okay, so we kind of broke it up into 3 skills. 1, identifying the boundaries, the domains.
okay,
2, being able to evaluate which parts of the graph evaluating FO of 3 or FO of 4,
Yeah.
certain values of FO of X.
Okay.
And that's a skill that doesn't even necessarily involve piecewise functions.
Right.
They just
That's
have to,
just
they just
That's
need to know
just
how to
the-
read a graph.
But they need to
Well,
know,
and
like,
which part they gotta
open
pick,
close-
right,
yeah,
cause it
open
relates
close
to your
stuff, yeah.
domain,
Right.
okay?
Yeah.
So, but they get the graph, they see the
Okay.
graph, and in Desmos, even if they didn't get the graph, they could graph it, and then they could look at it,
Okay,
which isn't something they could do last year. And they don't actually have to graph them, like, by hand.
Right.
So that's not a skill. that
That's
they
not a
can
skill
learn.
that they-
okay, but not even the graphing by hand, but like in terms of the technology, like how, if they're given a piecewise function,
Mhm.
and you've taught them all these strategies, right? Are they able to easily use the tools at hand, I guess, to manipulate the equation to get the answers? Like if somebody gave me a piecewise function that was x squared when x is between -3 and 5, and then 3x plus 7 when x is greater than 5, right? That's the equation. They asked me for the domain of the function, right? Hopefully, you don't need to graph for the domain, right? If we're teaching, they should be able to look at the x values, right?
Right.
And identify the domain, right? They should hopefully be able to identify the range, but if they can't do that algebraically, looking at it and understanding the quadratic, right, and the linear, right, then I need to go graph. Are they gonna be able to use Desmos and or the calculator to graph?
I think that most of them give them the graph.
Okay,
So this is the question that
Okay.
they had. So they had to match the equations to the domain, or the proper function to the graph. So they had to look at the domain.
okay,
Yeah, some of the domains are different, but
okay.
they could have figured it out purely based on the, almost purely based on the domain.
I hope that's gonna look
I
better
taught
than,
them to
No,
focus
that's how it prints
on,
on paper. It looks better when they take it on the device, but that's how it looks on paper.
I don't really have them using a whole lot of technology with those
Okay.
types, because I've taught them to recognize, like, okay, if you see the x squared, what type of equation is
Mhm.
that? They
Okay.
know that it means
Right.
that it should be a parabola, so the part of the graph that has a parabola, look at the interval.
Okay,
So they, like, I had them focus more on the inequality and the
Yeah.
interval
Okay.
that should go
Okay.
in between.
And we also did a lesson on vertices. So
Yeah.
that should help it too, like to see how high or
Yes,
low.
that's true, because we did focus on absolute value and being able to find the vertex point.
Right.
So if there's an absolute value
Okay.
function involved, they should be able to pick that out if that part is shown on the graph.
Right.
Yeah.
And we did function families unit 1.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Did you do transformations?
We
With
I don't-
absolute value.
Okay,
just
so-
horizontal,
Just
just horizontal and vertical shift, no
No,
steps.
but yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so, right, so think about, like, look at that question, like, what are some things that they might need to be reminded of, right? The translation, so is like that gonna be am I gonna stick that in my drill?
We have it.
You
Right.
know,
That for
okay.
this.
Okay, great.
So that's our day 5.
Okay.
What was the other step?
And we were supposed to hit on day 1, a little bit on day 1.
Graph
I
solution
did it as a
set,
warm-up for
I-
day one.
Set-
I should have, I forgot.
graph
the
the
sequence
solution
step.
set to a system of linear inequalities in two variables as the intersection of the corresponding half planes. So question 16 and 17.
Can you
Oh.
read that one more time?
Sorry?
It was,
Can you read that one more time?
Yeah. Graph the solution set to a system of linear inequalities in two variables as the intersection of the corresponding half planes.
So the,
Okay.
that question for us was, they just had to find what solutions worked for a given
a system.
Yes,
Yeah.
in 16, yes.
Right, so they had to graph it on Desmos and see which answers worked.
Well, for number 16,
For
they
16,
could
they
just
could've
substitute.
substituted.
Yeah,
Right.
they literally
Like, the
just need to
numbers were easy
substitute and
enough, I
see.
would've just substituted.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 of them involve zeros.
Right.
17, they could just.
For me, a lot of my students just mix up their,
X or Y.
yeah,
uh,
I know,
Almighty.
like,
Let's see
I
what
saw
happens.
so many of them.
Yelling at people. Come on, it's alphabetical order, isn't it?
Yes.
Based on last
I know.
Wait, this is the
W, X, Y,
Y-axis.
Z, it's alphabetical
I
order.
would go for no X.
Do you ever-
Yes, it's Y.
X's are across. Why
And
is that?
17 was a little bit, 17, they already had the graph and the shading and all of that. And it wasn't even a matter of like finding what the solution set was. The kids had to figure out what the system was. So that's a higher level problem for them, that's gonna
A lot
They
of
be.
my
probably,
kids-
they
my
probably
kids-
typed
But
them
it's
all
tedious-
into
it's tedious
Desmos.
to
That's
Yeah.
what my kids did. They copied and pasted.
Really? You can copy and paste?
Oh, I didn't even know you could
Oh, I
copy
didn't
and
even know
paste.
you
They were
could
all
copy.
Mine
Smart
were all
kids,
typed
they
in
do
there,
type
it's like,
things incorrectly.
Oh,
Like in quadratics, they'll miss.
So how did your kids do on 17 then?
They didn't do that well, and I don't know why.
How many questions were on the test?
20.
Watching their.
I
So
think some of my kids, when they go back and forth to Desmos, it's hard for them because they're clicking on one, like, they can
One
split their
tab.
They're trying
screens,
to
but they're
remember
trying
what
to
the
go back
equation
and,
said.
I didn't know you could copy and paste, so they're having, like, it takes them a while unless they, write it down and then think about the error of writing it down and then putting it into
Yeah, yeah,
Desmos,
yeah.
I
like,
think the other problem with the Desmos was if you didn't zoom in enough, like for the X and Y, the coordinates, it didn't
Oh.
look like this.
Yeah,
Oh, because the scale probably wasn't
Right.
the
Yeah.
same. This is
Yeah.
on a scale of 5 to 5.
Yeah, so if
And
it was
Desmos
too big,
is-
then
yeah.
it didn't look
My
like
kids
this.
said
That's
like
something we have to
millions.
Okay, so
is there any
think
way
about
to set the
that.
scale besides
You
zooming?
just,
Right.
you can set it, but
But I would just
I
tell
just
them to
kept telling them
touch,
to zoom.
touch on the intersection.
Yeah,
But
check to
wait,
see which
for-
points.
for MCAP, does that, would they have to switch between tabs? Like I taught them on the control tab, we'll switch between tabs for them to help them switch between the two, but for MCAP, do they need to, is it on the screen for them?
You probably have to get in the practice tests and look and see.
Yeah, we'll make sure we cover that with them when we
Okay.
get to that, practice.
Does MCAP have practice tests?
Didn't Parlett
Hopefully.
send
I
something?
think
think
they
she
should.
They should, because
I thought I
You
had
had-
forwarded something.
Yeah.
The other thing Jackie and I noticed, because speaking of how long it was taking them to type that into Desmos, we both noticed that our kids didn't use the whole time, like used maybe, like some of my kids finished in 20 minutes and then they were just done. And I'm like,
Yeah.
how did you finish 20 questions in 20 minutes? Like,
I know.
I don't know, mine took forever.
no,
Mine
none of mine used the whole time.
Mine took part 2 more seriously than part 1, and I gave part 2 first.
Yeah, you
So
can
thi-
definitely
this
copy it.
is gonna be like,
That's cool.
I think just the perseverance with it, right? So you bring up a good point in terms of the, okay, you've got this scrap paper, like, not even, I don't even wanna call it scrap paper, I don't know what y'all are calling it, right? But you have this tool right here, like, this needs to be complete,
Yeah.
right? So if there's nothing on your paper, you need to go back and let's do this, right? Because the other thing you wanna get them to do is to start to use as much time as possible,
Yeah.
right, so that they're not rushing. So even like you said, they use their tools, great, they use their tools. So if they're using tools, and this happened to be a test where tools could be used appropriately, can we start to get them working in the habit of maybe justifying why they picked their answer, right? Say, when I use Desmos or whatever, like this is what I saw, so that you can start to understand their reasoning, right? You know there's gonna be some pushback for them.
Right.
However, when they start to understand, okay, maybe if I do this work, it might have a positive impact on my overall grade because my teacher's just not taking the number that's in the computer, right?
Right.
They're giving me an opportunity to look at my errors, check my errors and stuff like that. Then you've also got a tool that if you need to go back and reteach, or you wanna spend some time, or you just have a little bit of time where, like if everybody bombed number 18, and let's say it was something algebraic, right? Everybody bombed that, or 90% of the kids, you can hand the kids back that paper and say, okay, what did you put on your paper, right? Let's see where we went wrong, right? So that's just gonna be perseverance in terms of the work moving forward with the kids, but I think continuing that practice on your common assessments, it will be helpful and fruitful in the long term. And then when you do testing, you gotta make sure that's part of Erin's packet. Right, so we gotta look at the structure of the test, they used to do that in English, and they would collect it, and the kids would get a classroom grade. And the kids, right?
did so much work.
Yes.
You're saying
you have absent notes, please
use
turn them into the
blank
front
paper
office
and have
so
to
that we
start
can get them
setting
in
it up.
before the
You
end
can't,
of the
like,
quarter.
print.
Thank
Yes,
you
you
and have a
can.
Yeah, I
positive
was
day.
thinking.
Why wouldn't I be able to print a piece of paper that has
Boxes.
boxes on it?
Pre-numbered,
Yeah.
and,
I've done that before.
my only concern about that is timing, like, would they still have the test in front of them, so we'd have to give them more time to take the exam,
What are you talking about?
right? If they're gonna justify if they're gonna go to,
No, you gotta teach, what do you mean more time to do the exam?
to like justify
To go back
why
and
they,
write their
why they picked this
explanations down.
answer. Yeah,
If they have work, that would be justification. But like she said, for 18, they all use Desmos,
right,
right? So,
okay, so just,
like, why, what did that, like, what was it? Like, they should be able to
What did you
write
put in
something down
Desmos?
on a sheet of
Gotcha,
paper
I'm with you.
about, this is what I did in
Intersection.
Desmos, right? It doesn't have to necessarily be every question,
I'm with you, I'm
right?
with
You
you.
got it now?
Yeah.
But
I
just so
was
that,
like,
because
Do
what
I
I
have
heard
something?
Natalie
Or
say
like
was,
Desmos
it was
sheet.
hard because
Sheet.
they used the tools, so I don't know what their reasoning was.
Right.
You know, I don't know what their thinking was behind the answers they picked. So if they're, and it's gonna be a process, but if we start it now, but those kids, when Erin did that for English, they were working between 75 and 80% of the period consistently.
And it was like
Um,
just a nice routine,
Yes.
that they know what to expect, kind of like a security blanket in a way. They sat there and they started numbering their
Yeah.
paper, like, before the
Yeah,
test started.
and they
so.
just like, they had their own special, like, they folded it once this way and 3 times that way, and then they knew, like, all right, I have to do work in these boxes to get credit.
I guess we do know how many questions are in each section too, ahead of time.
I think so.
Yeah,
Erin
usually
said.
it's-
So we can work with that, and we can definitely make that one of our priorities for our next meeting. Are you typing that up right now? Getting that set up for the Unit 7 exam.
Unit 7.
You go to
Three.
When is your unit, when's your
7
unit?
days.
When's your, tell me your unit 3 date again, so that I can put it in my calendar and I get ready for this one.
6 A and B days from now.
So February 10th is when we're looking?
10th and 11th.
So I can pull
Yes.
data.
10th and 11th.
Oh, look at you with your big 8-day calendar on your home screen.
Yeah.
So you'll email me, I'll make a note for the 12th,
Real impressive.
but you'll email me, even with the 4th off, you're still on that schedule with losing that 8-day, that 4th? Okay, so unit.
Wait, do we know if the 17th is an 8A or B day?
I don't know yet,
next
I do
week.
not know, I'm
Okay.
gonna assume that it's probably gonna be, well,
Don't assume.
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know, as soon as I know, I will let you know.
Yeah, if anything changes, I'll send it.
So,
Okay, so I'm gonna say
quick
February
wrap up.
12th is what I'm
we are
gonna put
doing,
Yeah,
in my calendar.
and I'll let you know.
Okay.
we're revisiting transformations in Unit 3 on when we do broken decay and when we do that review day. And we need to, substituting to check if certain point values work for.
Oh, we're
functions.
doing that one day. evaluating.
Yeah, so we have that in there. With that said, is that everything? You two will have those things
Right.
done by whenever, in time for the next thing.
Don't you worry,
it'll
be done.
I have to go get my car to my room.
I thought you said your car.
I'm gonna drive it there.
Alright, Ms. Bates, are you taking this down?